Our next talk is titled Ambiguity, Volatility, and Chaos, Materials Testing at the National Museum of the American Indian. It will be presented by both Emily Kaplan and Susan Heald. Emily Kaplan has been an objects conservator on staff at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, known as NMAI, since 1996. Along with preparing objects for exhibitions at the museum's New York and Washington, D.C. facilities, Emily is responsible for preventive conservation, focusing on storage and integrated pest management. Emily was the move conservator on the receiving end for the 5-year project to move the NMAI collection from New York to Maryland. Emily specializes in collaborative technical studies of pre-Columbian and colonial Andean objects, particularly drinking vessels known as keros. She is currently co-editing a book on keros with contributions from multiple disciplines. Emily received a master's in art conservation from Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario, Canada in 1993. Susan Heald has been NMAI's textile conservator since 1994 and was the Minnesota Historical Society's textile conservator from 1991 to 1994. At both institutions, she helped close old facilities and open new ones, providing many opportunities to research and test materials for storage enclosures and exhibition cases. Susan graduated from the University of Delaware Winterthur Museum program in art conservation with a textile major, objects minor, and received an undergraduate degree in chemistry and anthropology from the George Washington University. I'd like to mention that if you can't really see Susan's earrings today from the audience, get a close look at the next coffee break. And before I invite Emily and Susan to the stage, I just want to say, as a fellow Smithsonian colleague, well, first, I think the acronyms in DC are out of control for those of you who've never worked here. And I came from California, where recently an article was published about the highway system and how you have to acclimate to using numbers to give people directions, a long list of numbers. And here there's a long list of acronyms and introductions. So I'm trying to use full names here and get out of the acronym habit. But if you have any questions, please stop us and ask us to sort things out. But the more important comment is that Emily and Susan and other colleagues at NMAI, I think, have been so generous to us, as well as some colleagues from the Freer-Sackler, in sharing information within the Smithsonian family amongst museum units about material testing. As you all know, it's an onerous task, and when we can share information, it's great. And so I'm particularly grateful to Emily and Susan for helping us out at American Art. So the stage is yours, Emily and Susan.
So thank you, Tiarna, for the introduction. I wish I'd worn my hair back now. So I want to thank again Tiarna and Abigail and also Chris for planning a conference and bringing us all together today to talk about materials testing. Emily and I have been working together for 21 years now, and materials testing is a topic, while not near and dear to our heart, it is in some ways, but it's really important to us. So we were especially excited when we heard from Tiarna that there was going to be this gathering and this symposium. So I'm really grateful that we're all here today. National Museum of the American Indian, which I will now refer to as NMAI, or NMAI, has had a materials testing program that's centered around the Oddy test in place for a little under 15 years. And it has been a frequent source of doubt, frustration, and anxiety. And we know many of you know what we mean. We know you understand, which is why we titled our presentation Ambiguity, Volatility, and Chaos, with thanks and inspiration from cartoonist Roz Chast, whose recent graphic memoir, Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant?, has been a book that both of us have drawn strength from this past year, and somehow her images seemed really apt for our talk, and tongue-in-cheek, of course. But we are very happy to be here today to discuss our story, open the forum, and hopefully learn new solutions and get new ideas from all of you, our valued colleagues in the audience. So our testing program began in 2002 when we were evaluating exhibition materials for use in our new flagship museum that was then in construction on the National Mall, and it had a 2004 opening date. And all of the exhibit teams, as they're developing exhibits, there's a conservator and usually a conservation Mellon Fellow on every team. And though we'd been using the Oddy test since the mid-1990s, this 2002 date is when we really started standardizing a system for performing the test, analyzing our results, and then recording them. And there's the grand procession on the National Mall on opening day, and a nice image of our museum, which faces the Capitol. So during the design process for some of the inaugural exhibits, we discovered for the exhibit Our Universes, which was the exhibit I was assigned to as conservator, that we were required to use fire retardants on thematic lumber in some of the specified cases. And some of them were so large that they were structurally classified as rooms, in particular the Anishinaabe case in the lower left, and also technically would be required to have exit signs, which is funny because it's really impossible to get into that case. So the thematic lumber, or the thematic wood, was integral to the structures that community curators had selected to help explain ceremonies that are very important in their worldview and their philosophies that are related to the creation and the order of the universe, which is why the exhibit is entitled Our Universes. So we decided to test the proposed fire retardant, both alone and on a wood substrate that had been specified in the exhibitions and also the gift shop casework, and that product was Medex, which is a medium density fiberboard, an MDF panel with a formaldehyde-free adhesive. And from the website, I just looked this up the other day to make sure I was getting it all right, because it's been a long time. It says, with the versatility of a superior composite wood panel and the enhancement of indoor air quality, Medex has been specified in hundreds of commercial, institutional, and conservator projects since the 1980s. And I'm not sure if they're referring to us. So I want to thank David for giving a great introduction to the history of testing. That was so cool. So our lab, over the years, has used 3 Oddy test variants, 2 from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You can see the one on the upper left. That's the one that was studied in Studies in Conservation, 1999. And our current method, as described by Smith and Snyder in a poster that was at the ICOM-CC meeting in 2008. So, and you can see in the lower left, there's the ground glass. It's kind of 1, 2, 3, the ground glass, the ICAM jar, and then the jar, the tube with the stopper. So we switched from the first method with the ground glass lid because we were having trouble getting a good seal and we were losing water during the test. So we chose the second method with the ICAM jars with the screw-on lid and the Teflon insert to get a better seal, which we did definitely get a better seal with this method. However, we did notice that after several uses of the jars, we were seeing this deterioration inside the glass. And then luckily one of us went to the ICOM-CC meeting, saw this poster, which also described the problem and some of the issues with coupons not being corroded when they should corrode. And so then we decided to switch to this method, which is what we're using currently. And we also put Teflon tape to keep these stoppers from popping out when they're in the oven. So all 3 of the methods use the standard 3 coupons, the silver, copper, and lead, a small amount of water, which we used to use 2 milliliters. Then because of the corrosion on the coupons, we've switched to half a milliliter of water. We do 3 weeks in the oven as opposed to 40 weeks. 40 weeks, oh my God, that would be a really long time. The project managers would not like that. Okay, we used 3 weeks as opposed to 4 weeks because we found that we really weren't seeing a lot of difference between 3 and 4 weeks, and we really wanted to get some of the results back to our project managers and designers because time was really of the issue here. And so we still would do 3 weeks now. Okay, next slide. So, while the fire retardant itself alone tested very well, the Medex turned our lead coupon into a drippy gray goo, much to our shock and horror, especially because this is a product that had been spec'd throughout the museum. And though this quite unambiguous result horrified us, the graphic image of the corrosion on the coupon you see here worked in our favor, because when we sent the image to the project manager, it was sufficient to change the course and respecify a wood product, and it was quite late in the game when we got this information. So we were very thankful that we could do this. We ended up specifying apple ply, which is an interior grade birch laminate. And technically, it still fails the Oddy test. It just does so a lot less spectacularly than the Medix did. And we also tested quite a number of other green products and loads and loads of products at the time. And this early episode is well documented by our Mellon Fellow, former Mellon Fellow Alyssa Becker, in her 2003 AIC Textile Specialty Group presentation called Trial by Fire. And it's written up in the Textile Specialty Group postprints if you're interested. And during her year of research, she compared 9 different versions of the Oddy test. We've been fortunate to have these 3 fantastic dedicated Mellon Fellows, Alyssa Becker, Jennifer Bosworth, who's in the audience, and Luba Dovgon-Nurse, who produced instructions for the NMAI Oddy test protocols as their methodology has evolved over the years. So the title page of our first binder of instructions, the lower left, was put together by Alyssa, who demonstrated grace and humor and a little bit of goofiness during the especially stressful time that led up to the inaugural exhibits on the mall. And at least 4 or 5 of the people that are pictured in this are here today. And Emily is not pictured because she was working on the move of the exhibits from New York to Washington while we were all preparing for the inaugural exhibits. And we were also testing not only for the inaugural exhibits, but we were testing all the materials that were going to be used in our new storage facility in Suitland. In 2004, not 2008, as it says on the slide, Jennifer Bosworth updated Alyssa's manual, incorporating some very specific instructions for coupon and glassware cleaning and for material and results documentation. Because we all know in order to get the very best results from the Oddy test, you really need to be careful and prepare and record everything very methodically and be very clean and pay attention to all your details, which takes a lot of time. And sometimes we just don't have the time we need, which can lead to a feeling of desperation. So how can we be more efficient? Background research first. We read all the available product literature, technical specifications, and the material safety data sheets. And if we have questions, we try and contact the manufacturer's technical representative. And we also consult our colleagues, as Tierna was saying. We're in touch with anybody we can think of who might have used the product already. So based on the results of our preliminary research, we found that sometimes we can pass or fail a product and skip the Oddy test altogether. So back in 2002, we often relied just on the Oddy test results, and now we always place a small amount of our sample to be tested into a Ziploc bag with a small piece of a AD strip from the Image Permanence Institute. These strips were developed for evaluating the degradation of acetate film, or the vinegar syndrome, and within 24 hours, we find that we can get a good indication of the product's acidity. Blue being good, we have a nice little fabric sample on there. If it gets green or yellow, you know you're in trouble, like the little piece of apple ply that you can see down in the lower left, or in the vial, in the glass vial, is a big wad of J-Lar tape that we recently somebody told us that it was not performing well, and it's kind of acidic too. So we also use spot tests, and in the center you can see the sodium azide test for reducible sulfur. If you only have a little bit of sample to use, especially fiber sample, you place it under a microscope slide, you let the sodium azide solution creep under the cover slip, and then you get the evolution of nitrogen bubbles off of the fiber, and that's indicative of reducible sulfur. Or if you have a big sample, you can use the lead acetate paper and pyrolysis test for reducible sulfur. And this is just done in a pipette, a sealed pipette with, and you heat it up over a flame and an alcohol burner, and the lead acetate paper will turn a brownish color. In the test that you see here, we also put a pH strip in the top, so you can look for your reducible sulfur with your lead acetate paper and get an indication of your acidity if you have a pH indicator strip in there. We really like what we call Nancy and Scott's spot testing book. The reference is here because that's been a really good resource for doing more spot tests as we're preparing for all of the materials. Now.
So boredom and anxiety, right? Good morning, everybody.
I hope we didn't bore you.
So I'm going to go into talk with you a little bit about what we do at NMAI, what Susan's talked about our protocol and as it's changed over the years. So we've developed, thank goodness again for our Mellon Fellows, and Jen Bosworth, who's here, actually did a lot of this, developed a protocol for people to submit samples to us, so that's designers or exhibition fabricators, project managers, whoever, whether in-house or out-of-house, or sometimes people looking for projects that aren't even to do with NMAI. So we ask for this packet of materials, so all of the information about the material, including a sample. The sample needs to be a good size so we can actually get it into the vial to test it. Our exhibit shop at NMAI has been wonderful about cutting up tiny little cubes of apple pie in different convoluted manners. And all the manufacturer information, and then we compile all of the information on our end from the actual test results. And so this is all of the information that is, I'm not going to go through it all, that is in these packets, and then Jen Bosworth again devised these handy-dandy envelopes which fit in a file cabinet. So each of the samples, if we have sample left, which we try to do in case we need to retest something, which we often do, the material type, the product name, and our tracking system, and that's all organized by product type. And so we've got data from nearly 900 tests from 202 to 2014, and we do happily share this with others, as Tiarna mentioned. So we have also this document. It's actually called Conservation Approved Exhibit Materials List. I'm going a little fast there. So we update this periodically, and as Susan mentioned, the conservators are always a member of each exhibition development team, starting at a certain point, so we're able to provide that to stakeholders. And we sort of go over the general outlines that we've discovered and that others have worked on. So we're constantly updating this, but again, it's really wonderful to have pre-program interns and Mellon Fellows to help us keep this up. And we also note on the bottom of each page that this is an internal document which is for distribution by NMAI conservation staff only. And David Saunders in his wonderful keynote referred to Pam's book, and which is on the left, and then others, the National Park Service Exhibit Conservation Guidelines was really useful for us, and the publications and work that's come out of CCI, Jean Tétrault's work in particular, his coatings for display and storage, and then his airborne pollutants, which came out sort of at the end of our big push to establish the acceptable materials for the inaugural exhibits at the mall. So this is the document that we do share with other institutions. I probably say this later, but all of this data is in a spreadsheet, which we also share. So, I think that this has been referred to already, but what happens with this data when it gets out there? We have been in the situation of picking up the phone all of a sudden, because we did all these tests and we shared the information, all of a sudden people were calling us, asking us about different products. And again, as Dr. Saunders mentioned, there are so many different variables that it would be awfully nice if we could just say yes or no, pass or fail on the phone, but you usually can't. So we have disclaimers, but we are, as a federally funded institution, we are required to share our information, and as I said, we do want to. We have never turned anybody down, and we had originally hoped to post our results on the NMAI website, but talked with our Smithsonian Office of General Counsel, that's OGC to you, Tiarna, who really were not comfortable with this, and they discouraged making the results public because you could appear to be endorsing or defaming the product despite clear, disclaimers. And so one of the challenges of sharing this data freely is loss of control, also known as chaos. So we found our documents and data, just like Susan mentioned with the MEDEX of being conservationally approved or whatever they said, we found our bits and pieces of our documents and data turn up sort of all over the place in other museums' contract specs, bid packages, other people's websites. Sometimes the data is misrepresented, disclaimers tend to get excluded, and this somehow morphs into materials that are approved by the Smithsonian, which then we would lose our jobs. So, and at one point, several Smithsonian conservators formed a committee hoping to establish an internal Smithsonian SharePoint site to distribute and share the testing data, because as Tiarna alluded to, there are a number of Smithsonian museums, and not everyone has the time or the resources to do the testing. So you would think that we would have sort of a central place, or you might think that every museum would do their own testing, but it just doesn't work that way. So we were hoping to share the data internally at least. That did not come to fruition. But we're absolutely thrilled and delighted about the AIC Wiki project, which Samantha and Colleen are going to talk about after this, which we think will solve all of our problems. Are you ready? But there have been good times too. So, doing this, we do everything over a long period of time, I think. So a lot of time for self-reflection, not exactly leisurely. So it has been really great to move from the MEDEX to the Appleby, in our case, fabrication. And now we pretty much only use Sintra, which is one of the expanded PVC products, which has working properties similar to, but not identical to wood. And I see Rick Palacera here, who was with our exhibit shop and now with OEC, who could talk with you more about that. We're happy to help with other institutions, and reviewing your documentation and your data is good to do. And plus, we got a new oven, so that was really awesome. Susan was super happy with that, and this does work much better. So finally, to conclude, we resolved to find a better way, and as we've said, we're looking forward to revising and updating our procedures, streamlining them, figuring out a way to make the data more usable. It's very hard to get people for everyone to understand all of the variables that exist that, again, were alluded to earlier. So who would have thought we would be so excited about a 2-day conference on materials testing, but we are so excited, and thank Tiarna and FAIC for putting this together. And we also want to acknowledge our Mellon Fellows over the years, especially Alyssa, Jennifer, Jen, and Luba, but all other Mellon Fellows, pre-program interns, current and former staff, our people in the exhibit shop, our colleague Jaisun Sang at MCI, Museum Conservation Institute, which is part of Smithsonian, and all of you, so numerous colleagues who we've been consulting with over the years. I like David's line, we do not understand matters fully, so okay, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Our next talk is by another team of generous colleagues, Colleen Snyder and Samantha Springer. Their talk is titled, Putting the Wiki Platform to Work, Sharing Material Testing Results. Colleen Snyder is Associate Conservator of Objects at the Cleveland Museum of Art, where she has cared for an encyclopedic collection of artworks ranging from the ancient bronzes to contemporary outdoor sculptures for the past 5 years. She received her MA in Art Conservation from Buffalo State College in 2008 and has completed internships at such institutions as the Walters Art Museum and the J. Paul Getty Museum at the Villa. Colleen has a BA in Classical Archaeology and tries to get back into the field whenever possible, including most recently working as conservation supervisor for the Rutgers University Archaeological Field School in Italy. Her research interests include historical repair materials and techniques used on archaeological objects. Samantha Springer recently relocated to Oregon to work as conservator at the Portland Art Museum, where she is responsible for all conservation aspects of the broad fine arts collection. This follows her work as Associate Conservator of Objects at the Cleveland Museum of Art from 2009 to 2015. She graduated from the Winterthur University of Delaware program in art conservation in 2008 and held internships at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, National Museum of the American Indian, Art Institute of Chicago, the Field Museum, and Alaska State Museums. While Samantha remains a generalist due to the nature of her job, she has particular interest in preventive conservation, sustainability, and working with living artists and cultural representatives as a means toward preserving less tangible aspects of artwork, such as artist's intent. Colleen and Samantha.
Good morning. Thank you to Tirna and her colleagues for giving us a chance to talk about the Wiki Materials Testing site. So as we heard this morning already, Andrew W. Oddy first introduced an accelerated corrosion test used for evaluating exhibition case materials at the British Museum in 1973. The Oddy test, as it is commonly called, continues to be used by museums as the primary litmus test for materials used in the display of artwork and cultural heritage materials. Several variations and improvements have been published since, including this often referred to publication by Thickett and Lee, initially published in 1996 and revised in 2004. Almost every institution has their preferred method based on the resources available to them. Although conservators continue to use the test and informally share results, there has been historical resistance to publicizing them. One of the primary issues with publishing results is fear of manufacturer backlash, or alternatively being held responsible for damage to objects caused through the use of a so-called approved material. In addition, variations in Oddy testing protocol have thus far prevented the standardization of results. Finally, the accelerated corrosion test is only one of various methods of evaluation, and results may be quickly voided by unannounced product manufacturing changes. It seems appropriate, having just passed the 40th anniversary of Andrew Oddy's initial publication, for us to address the topic of materials testing and sharing results, especially in light of the fact that the British Museum has recently published the results, again as we heard this morning, dating from 2009 through 2014 on their website. The initiative to share materials testing results began at the request of AIC's Research and Technical Studies Specialty Group, and in 2009, the J. Paul Getty Museum contributed the initial content to the newly established materials testing page on the AIC Wiki. This included a general explanation of Oddy testing, a description of their testing protocol, and a list of adhesives and tapes tested by the Getty Conservation Institute in 2000. In 2012, a platform was created on the American Institute for Conservation Wiki site so that conservators could easily share their materials testing results. This platform was established based on feedback that there were a number of organizations who would be willing to share their data only if they felt comfortable that it was hosted on, number one, a neutral site with other institutions, and number two, that they didn't have to set up a whole new site or platform. Thus, the Materials Testing Wiki was begun with the hope that conservation colleagues would feel more comfortable sharing information on a collaborative platform, as this platform would provide a kind of safety in numbers, so to speak. Around the same time as the Wiki platform was being established, the Cleveland Museum of Art's renovation campaign prompted us to perform a review of our own Oddy testing protocols, as we were asked to build an internal reference library of tested materials. The review included comparing protocols to other institutions, including information available on the AIC Wiki. In January of 2012, after a timely call for Wiki contributions from AICE editor Rachel Perkins-Ehrenstein, Samantha and myself, along with our objects conservator colleague Elizabeth Homburger, now at LACMA, expressed interest in creating a materials database on the Wiki. Through conversation with other conservators and with feedback from Rachel, we realized there was a real need and desire from the conservation community for something like this to happen, but no one had yet jumped in and gotten the database up and running. The scope of the project was to significantly expand the Oddy testing page, creating a searchable and sortable table of tested materials. In addition, any contributor who shared their protocol should be able to easily add the results to the table, either on their own or passing it along to us to add in. So at this point in the talk, Samantha is going to take you on a tour of the Wiki to show you how the database is set up, how it can be used, and how you can contribute.
Thank you, Colleen. Okay, so first, how do you get to the Wiki? So there's several different ways, but probably the most easily accessible way is through the main AIC website. And there is a nice little link up here at the top to the Wiki. So that will take you to the main AIC Wiki page. And as you can see under the research and analysis, under the RATS group heading, there is a link for materials testing. And so that will bring you to this page. And I have put the website, the direct link, down at the bottom, but the links are also published in the abstracts page, so don't worry about writing it down. Okay, so on here you can see that there's a couple of links, but this is one of the links to the AIC Materials Databases page that Colleen and I kind of created. Not kind of created, we built them. But I don't want to take responsibility for anything. So, so this will take you to our main landing page, which is called Oddy Test Materials Databases. And when we started it, we were really only doing Oddy tests. And now the pages incorporate results from other materials testing, because we just, we want to be inclusive here. From this page, you can find, so yes, so that's how you can get there, or you can use any of these links to get to those pages, and that's the direct link at the bottom there. So coming back to the page, as you scroll down, you will see at the bottom here the disclaimer that we have, because gotta cover your back. Let's see, and every page actually has the disclaimer on it, just to cover all of our bases. So as you scroll down, you have the section on the background, kind of like how this how these pages came to be, and there is a link to the protocols. So one of the kind of important aspects we thought about sharing our test results is also sharing how you actually carry out the test. So the protocols, so there's another link to the protocols. And so when you click on that link, it will take you to this page, so the Oddy test protocols, and you can see at the top here there's a table of contents. And so far we have a few contributors, so we're not the lonely ones up there. And so we have some results from the PAT test that the National Archives of Australia, so yay, we have some international representation. The GCI, the results that they had already put onto the AIC Wiki, results that when I was working at the Cleveland Museum of Art that we had obtained, and most recently OSGE has been contributing results from the Autry National Center, and we incorporated the results that are on the British Museum website into the databases. So if you click on one of those links, just as an example, the Cleveland Museum of Art protocol, it will scrolled, I was recommended not to actually go to the live site so that this would all go forward as planned. But if you scroll down the page, you will get to the different protocols. And so this is an example of what we had put up there for the Cleveland Museum of Art. So going back to the main page, kind of the heart of the materials database are these results tables. So we have them divided up into 4 categories. So we have exhibition fabrics, case construction materials, exhibition adhesives and tapes, and then finally exhibition paints and sealants. So I'll just hone in on the fabrics, because that has the most pictures, it's the prettiest. The tables are set up with a variety of different pieces of information. It doesn't have the same extent of what is on the spreadsheet that the British Museum was sharing, but we've tried to narrow it down so that it is kind of focused on what's most important and doesn't leave too much out. And what we've included are images of the results when it's possible, when you have them. So ideally, contributors provide all of the information for every column here and also give you a picture. And so when you click on the actual image, then you'll see what's showing up here on the right is an enlarged image, and so you can look at the results yourself. You can even make the decision yourself, you know. It's not just the result that you're seeing on the table that the contributors have given, but you can kind of make your own assessment. So just zooming in on the table there, you can see we have the material name, the manufacturers, the results, when you tested, the tester, and so forth. So the tables are also sortable. So when you go to the page, initially they're in order of the manufacturer or supplier. But if you want to sort them by material name, you just click on this little box at the top, and then ta-da, they're sorted by material name. Then say you want to sort it by the date tested and you want to see the most recent tests that were done, you just click on that box, and then ta-da, they're sorted by date. So in order to do this, there are recommendations for kind of best practices for putting the information onto the site. So when you scroll down all the way to the bottom, there's also a section for the list of manufacturers. So all the manufacturers that are represented on the tables are listed at the bottom. And then at the bottom of the protocols, there's a short bibliography. So this is really still a work in progress, and the idea is that, you know, the more contributions we have, we can keep this information up to date. And so we have some information on how to become, how you can help, how you can become a contributor, and kind of best practices for how to put the information onto the site. Oh, so now back to Colleen.
So as hopefully you've now seen, we hope that by establishing best practices for sharing results in the AIC Wiki, such as each contributor describing their testing protocol and imaging their test coupons, the databases will allow conservators to better evaluate others' results for themselves. By publishing materials testing results on a neutral site like the AIC Wiki, we hope that other institutions, including many of you in the audience, will see the benefit of such a resource and feel comfortable participating in greater numbers. As Samantha already mentioned, recently the Autry National Center joined the group of those sharing information. And though the database largely contains the results of Oddy tests at this point, it's not just limited to that test. Again, as she showed you, the National Archives of Australia submitted the results of their photographic activity testing, which is great. Which brings up an additional benefit of sharing tested materials, especially when involving international contributors. And that's finding equivalent exhibition materials that have been tested and approved in other countries. I know I recently found myself in a situation where colleagues abroad were asking for a case material that we recommended, and they wanted something equivalent available in Europe, and of course they wanted to know in 2 days. And so I hope that in the future, you know, that all of us can refer to the Wiki database in a situation like that. So even if you think you're not yet ready to submit the results of testing, we hope you'll all take a look at the database and give us feedback on how usable it is. In fact, we recently got feedback from the Online Mount Makers Forum, and we incorporated it into the site seen here to add a section of related links. We don't yet have the links, but it's there. So in conclusion, future goals of the project include increasing the number of contributors, automating data entry, and integrating further feedback from users. The ultimate goal is to create a resource that will aid staff at institutions of every size and type in choosing materials appropriate for their needs and collections. Thank you.